Deep Sea Embers Chapter 71 to 80. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 71 Inches Gathering in the Gutter. There were a few seconds of silence the moment Duncan took out the sun talisman. Eventually, the tall and thin-looking boss suddenly lowered his voice and said urgently, "Put that away. There might be eyes of the church nearby. Does this talisman really work? Is this thing so convincing among the Sunists?" Duncan became happy in his heart, but he still maintained a mysterious posture of covering half his face. Then speaking lightly after putting away the talisman, "If the church does have an eye here, they would be more attracted to a large group like you guys gathering together instead of my talisman." As soon as his voice fell, a bearded man on the opposite side subconsciously spoke. "No, our group will only attract the police at most since we won't disturb the social order." "Shut up." The tall, thin leader immediately hushed the underling with a glare before returning his gaze to Duncan. "This is a necessary caution, after all, this city is very unsafe now. You come closer and don't make any superfluous movement." While Duncan calmly walked towards the opposite side, the other party continued to keep a vigilant eye on him. Only after they're close enough did the thin, tall guy ask, "Are you a local believer in this city?" Duncan thought for a moment and nodded. Yes. The original owner of the body did live in the city, and he now lives in the city, and on these easy questions, he decided to tell the truth. His plan was simple: find a way to fish in troubled waters and blend in among these cultists. This way, he could catch any news that might arise and perhaps ask more questions without exposure. Of course, in the worst-case scenario, he could always let I transform and bird them up. The tall and thin man didn't notice the dangerous thoughts running wild in the compatriots' heart. "As far as I know, the Storm Church attacked the local branch several days ago." "That's right. The assembly in the sewers several days ago was a disaster. The ceremony got out of control, and we lost a lot of people as a result. But I escaped." Duncan said this without psychological burden because it's technically the truth. Even so, the ghost captain could clearly feel the tense atmosphere around him from these people after his announcement. Hurrying to correct his careless remark, "There were 3 others like me who escaped, but we were separated afterward. I can no longer get in contact with them anymore. Then I met you through the sun's guidance." Ads by PubFuture. The tall and thin man snorted noncommittally, and then his gaze fell on the guy's shoulder. "What is that?" "My pet," Duncan said casually. "Can't you see? It's just an ordinary dove. I bent her head at the right time and made a loud, cooing sound." This dove is so loud. The tall and thin man seemed to finally relax his vigilance, probably subconsciously thinking a guy who's been taught to abide by the rules from the church wouldn't have the habit of running around in the city with a bird pet. "Follow me. It's not safe to talk outside. No, in .c ohm." Duncan immediately breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. Finally, his plan to fish in troubled waters seemed to have worked. Then he followed the cultists and went deeper into the alley. The alley ran longer than Duncan had imagined, leading to this city's most decrepit slums. Then after passing through another old steam-releasing pipe system, through sewage paths, and winding into a low, dilapidated complex of buildings, Duncan finally got his first glimpse of what it truly means to be impoverished in this world. He thought the shop where he and Nina lived was already at the bottom of society, but now, what the antique shop represented could only be called lavish in the lower sectors. Most of the dilapidated houses lining the road are lifeless and looked abandoned for some time, but a few did seem to give off a small life presence through the windows. Likely some homeless folks hiding in this forgotten part of the city had taken residence, and they're now watching these uninvited guests who intruded upon their turfs. But in the end, these lifeless eyes were quickly retracted. The dozen or so intruders were obviously enough to make any homeless folk cower in fear. "See, this is the most prosperous city-state on the boundless sea," planned, the man in black who first caught Duncan's attention muttered. "It's the same everywhere you go. Whether it's the other human settlements or the elves' Wind Harbor that they call the promised land of peace and justice, it is all like this in the slums. How much of this world's light can actually reach these souls, you think?" Duncan didn't reply to that comment but glanced up towards the steam-spewing pipes coming down from the upper sector of the city and industrial area. Everything around the pipes was giving off an unpleasant stench of chemicals and sewage. Though he didn't live in this city for long, Duncan had no trouble understanding why urban cancerous cells like these cultists would pop up again and again then. Ads by PubFuture. Silently giving the indignant man in black a nod, Duncan decides to keep his opinion to himself instead of lashing out. Regardless of what the reason being, seduced by the sun cult or persecution by life, the fact remains that these twisted heretics are kidnapping innocent civilians from these slums to sacrifice in their sick rituals. As a foreigner who didn't know enough about the world, Duncan had no right to judge them too much for the time being. However, from a former sacrifice's perspective, his opinion of these cultists could only be very negative. In silence, he finally reached the stronghold of these cultists. The base was located in the underground parts of an abandoned factory. Somehow, these cultists always seem to know which gutter to use as their gathering place to avoid detection, or perhaps there are just that many sewers in this prosperous steam city to tap. Anyways, after climbing over a collapsed brick wall fencing the property and opening an iron gate to the basement, Duncan was quickly ushered in and down into an open-styled room. It was a warehouse type of place, or it could have been a mechanical room at some point. Regardless of what it was meant to function as, the basement had been emptied out, and only the plumbing system remained on the ceiling. There are still some gas lamps hanging on the walls, but those could no longer be lit. Dark spaces are dangerous, so the cultists avoided any area that their greased torches couldn't reach. Eventually, they arrived before a larger group of cultists already waiting for them. Duncan observed the individuals gathered here in the wide basement with some surprise, and likewise, the cultists were also watching him with worry and caution. To them, Duncan was a stranger and must be kept on watch with vigilance, which they acted on by surrounding him. Frowning at this stance, "What, you must search me again after coming inside? I didn't know there was such a rule. If you are really a spy from the church, then a body search is useless." The tall thin man rummaged through his pocket and pulled out a cloth strip to hand over to Duncan. "Relax, merely a more rigorous verification process. This is all for caution. We have lost far too many compatriots over the past few years due to various reasons. Take it and recite after me." Duncan glanced at the object handed over by the other party and saw that it was a dirty strip of cloth. At first glance, it looked no different from a torn fabric of an old shirt stained by blood. Is this another prop for the Suntists to verify their fellow believers? Duncan was a little surprised in his heart, lamenting that this was really a group worthy of being hunted by the professionals from the church. Day in and day out, hiding in the dark crevices of society has honed their skills to a level where they are watching out for spies and outsiders at every minute. In the name of the sun, may the light of the Lord shine. Duncan immediately got a familiar sensation after hearing that chant. Just days ago, a cultist had said something similar to him and also handed a talisman over. Without anyone noticing, he quietly seeped a spark of green flame into the seemingly ordinary strip of cloth in his hand. Only after doing this did Duncan follow the chanting prayer with a straight face, which naturally remained quiet to the praying mantra. Finally nodding after a brief period of unresponsiveness, the cultist appeared pleased and smiled while retrieving the cloth. "Welcome back to the glory of the Lord, my fellow brother." Chapter 72 inches the information from the meeting. To be fair, these cultists are actually quite cautious. They didn't believe the strange compatriot just because Duncan took out the sun talisman, nor did they easily believe him because he explained what happened on the sacrifice grounds. Instead, they observed Duncan's words and deeds along the way and even conducted an additional verification procedure to confirm the stranger's identity after arriving at the assembly hall. They had done their best in terms of being cultists in hiding. But all of their screening measures assumed Duncan was a normal human being. That's a mistake and likely a serious one. The tall, skinny little leader retrieved the inconspicuous strip of cloth from Duncan, seemingly completely unaware of the change in the power of this sacred object. Then, pointing to the corner of the assembly hall, "Compatriot, rest over there first. You are not the only new face here." Duncan nodded and walked to that inconspicuous corner while paying attention to every face in the basement. Unlike what he had seen in the sewer grounds before, he was surprised to find that none of the sun worshippers wore the iconic black robes that were unique to their religion but dressed like ordinary citizens despite some still wearing black clothes. He asked the cultist beside him curiously, "Don't we need to hide our face?" The cultists he questioned looked surprised. "Do you native believers in plan hide your faces when you meet?" Duncan immediately frowned slightly. You are not from Planned. We came from Lunsa, another believer next to him said calmly. After confirming that the stranger in front of him was really a member of the Sun faith, the followers here were obviously letting their guard down. Everyone here only managed to settle down last week, but before we could contact the local branch, the attack happened. Ads by PubFuture. Everyone here is from Lunsa. Duncan was a little surprised as he realized why there were so many Suntists in the city despite the big event several days ago. Most of us are compatriots from Lunsa, but there are also other members from other city-states that gathered at the calling. Another believer next to him joined the conversation. Alas, you have more or less heard about the situation here, so I won't repeat it. For the past 4 years, those damn hounds from the Storm Church have been fighting our cause. It must have been hard on you all who stayed behind and planned. Thankfully that's in the past now. Duncan nodded noncommittally and then heard the believer he questioned before speak again. This dove on your shoulder is real, unusual. Twitching out of his eye, he knew I's presence would draw a lot of attention, but the ghost captain didn't expect this level of a draw. Acting casually, this is my pet. It can help me do a lot of things. Despite the bland appearance, the thoughts in his mind were already running wild at what he had gathered. A large number of Sun followers were pouring into the city-state of Planned and they're planning something big. To think my little scheme of fishing in troubled waters is actually paying off. At the same time, he also understood why the cultists attending the rally here did not hide their faces. Unlike the local natives, these outsiders didn't need such an arrangement. They already knew each other from the start and mostly came from the same city-state. Moreover, they lacked the experience and discipline that came about in Plan due to the constant purging from the Storm Church. In retrospect, dressing casually also had its benefits. If the meeting did get bombed by the authorities, these folks could just make a run for it through the crowds and blend in. By then, who could tell who's who? November LBJNN. Then suddenly, Duncan detected a gaze shooting his way. Immediately looking over, he locked onto the owner according to his intuition, a petite girl with short black hair standing more than 10 meters away. The girl wore a black dress embellished with white lace, her face was beautiful and calm, and she looked about the same age as Nina. However, the most striking thing was not any of the details mentioned, but the dark red ring with a delicate silver bell hanging from the neck. This trinket gave the girl a cute but particularly strange appearance. The girl naturally turned her gaze elsewhere once the man looked over. She shifted silently to avoid eye contact, but it was obvious the girl knew she's been caught. Ads by PubFuture. Why is there such a young kid in this gang of cultists? Duncan couldn't help but wonder in his heart. He got this strange inkling sensation that, unlike the cultists here, the girl didn't belong in this environment. While thinking about it, the sound of the door shaft turning suddenly interrupted the noise, followed by the thin, tall cult leader ordering the exit to be closed and for them to gather at the center. Duncan collected his thoughts and paid close attention to the changes on the scene. Eventually, the man at the center spread his arms to showcase a familiar item in his hand. It was a pale golden sun mask, precisely the same mask worn on the face of the cult priest who presided over the sacrifice ritual during Duncan's first spirit walk. Honor to the glory of the Lord, we shall now silently recite the mantra under the Lord's gaze, said the tall, thin man in a reverent tone. Bow down to this blessed mask, and may the shelter of the heirs of the sun support me and guide my brothers and sisters. The surrounding worshippers immediately chanted the name of the real sun god in unison while making a fist-praying gesture to the forehead. This was their way of worshipping the golden mask, not the wearer. After the recital, the tall, thin man solemnly puts the mask on as expected. Of which, Duncan immediately noticed the change in the air and the person's temperament. Something's coming. He couldn't say what this feeling was, as if another character had descended upon the mask and its wearer. Regardless, a powerful consciousness was projecting its power through the golden mask, similar to what Duncan was doing with this specific shell. May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the ways of the Lord come to the world. The surrounding believers exclaimed in unison over the new arrival. This strange heavy atmosphere wasn't that new to Duncan. He had seen the priest wear this mask in the sewer before, but unlike this time, that shell he used was dead and already deceased. On top of that, he had missed the summoning ritual, which might explain why he didn't get the same pressure as now. Perhaps there's a reason for calling these priests the emissary, instead of mere formality and rank. Maybe a communication device. After connecting the dots on this interesting item, Duncan's eyes changed from curiosity to a glowing desire to own it. Maybe that mask and I are fated. Chapter 73 Inches Incomplete Memory. Duncan quickly withdrew his gaze from the golden mask to blend in like an ordinary believer once things started rolling. This was so he wouldn't attract further attention since he hadn't heard anything useful yet. Then, when he lowered his head to act inconspicuously, Duncan suddenly got that strange sensation of being stared at again. The man frowned slightly in annoyance. Then searching around, he again found the source, and like before, it was the child wearing that strange bell collar around the neck, averting eye contact when he looked over. Now, this got the guy wondering. He's sure they didn't know each other. In the memory of the original owner of this body, there was no information regarding this child. Why is a follower of the sun god looking my way so frequently? Is it because of eye on my shoulder? She's that much of a chic attraction. He thought about this possibility, but then the cult leader interrupted that train of thought by speaking in a somewhat echoing and divine voice that demanded attention. Talk about a transformation. The prayer is over. The Lord has witnessed our piety and awe. Grace has shone on our souls, so my brothers and sisters, be gratified that we have persevered for one more day in this difficult and dark world. We're one day closer to seeing the day when our son is reborn and recasted upon this world. The priest, wearing the golden mask, then spreads his hands and casts his gaze at the corner where a certain person stands. But before proceeding with today's gathering, I would like to welcome two of our compatriots who were once trapped by darkness in these difficult times. Thanks to the guidance of our Lord, they've been reunited with us. Go ahead, my fellow faithful, introduce yourself. Two compatriots. Ads by PubFuture. Duncan suddenly remembered that the leader mentioned he was not the only new face around these halls. For some reason, the ghost captain's attention shifted to the little girl wearing that black frilly dress. You can call me Shirley. The girl took half a step forward and spoke frankly. My parents are both followers of our faith. Unfortunately, they were killed by the minions of the Storm Church 4 years ago. I have been hiding around the crossroad all these years without managing to make contact with our siblings. It's great that you're all here now. Her voice was not loud to the point of being quiet and well behaved. In fact, Duncan could never match the girl with the picture of a bloodied cultist willing to sacrifice innocent lives. Welcome back among us, young sister. The leader nodded, then turned to face the surrounding worshippers. Shirley's parents were killed by the purge 4 years ago, and we have found her parents' names on that year's list. Next is another compatriot that joined us today. The ringleader's gaze finally fell on Duncan. Duncan, I live in the lower sector. He had already prepared for this, so he wasted no time in the introduction. A few days ago, the Storm Church attacked a sacrificial ground me and my local siblings created. I am the only survivor left. He said this briefly but sincerely, like someone that didn't want to recall a terrible memory. Since the news of the Storm Church's raid had made the news, the cultists had no reason to doubt his story. Seemingly pleased by the smooth introduction, the ringleader began again by nodding and adding, "This is a tested compatriot. After experiencing the cruelty of those hounds from the Storm Church, he is still trying his best to return to the Lord's embrace. We also found the blessed keepsake of our faith on him, so his words are credible." Some of the cultists sighed over the tragic story, and some nodded in approval. Duncan, on the other hand, only wanted to get things moving by putting on a blank face and reciting the multiplication table backward. The brief introduction is over, the leader finally got onto something interesting, and now to update you all on the situation. Duncan's ears immediately perked up. At present, there are still a large number of compatriots gathering in this city. This includes ordinary faithful like us and powerful emissaries and priests overseeing the whole mission. Fret not, our powers are gradually growing, and the day of reorder is fast approaching. But it is undeniable that the minions of the Storm Church have caught on to our presence. They and the crooks inside City Hall are making entry stricter and investigating foreigners entering planned. At this point, several of our siblings have already been captured by the police. Be warned, we must succeed in our objective. Do not let your guard down, be wary, be on watch, and look out for the hounds from the church. It is fine to slow down the progress in collecting the sacrifices. The heirs of the Lord know about our plight, and they have issued a decree that they will personally take care of the remaining half of the sacrifice pool if we can't solve it. Check out our recommendations curated just for you. Check out our recommendations curated just for you. Discovery feed. Ads by PubFuture. The surrounding cultists all reacted like they'd been greatly moved by the news and started praising the sun god. Duncan, on the other hand, wasn't so pleased. He didn't forget the mass carnage in that sewer, and it seems that the mastermind, whatever sun heirs or sun children, will personally take charge and participate. At present, our main task is to determine the specific location of the sun fragment. Remember, our goal is always to bring the real sun god back to life, and finding the lost sun fragments is the most important part. Duncan's heart shuddered. Sun fragments? What is that stuff? Can a stack of sun fragments make the spear of Arden bigger? The bird on his shoulder suddenly grew agitated, which manifested in I issuing a low cooing sound from the throat and bobbing her head up and down. NOVELBJN.C ohm. Duncan naturally could tell what the bird wanted through the ghost fire connection. However, there's no way Duncan would allow I to start crying out something like, slaughter the enemy with the solar tomahawk, in the middle of a cultist gathering. Shish, he hushes the bird in a mumble. Then caressing I's head to soothe the girl, the guy knew this was asking a lot from a yappy mouth. Are we able to determine the approximate location of the sun fragment? Is there a way to detect it? Then another cultist spoke up to ask the question they all wanted to know. The sun fragment is currently asleep and cannot be detected by any means. The leader shook his head in disappointment, but the Lord has sent down guidance, telling us the nearest fragment is currently hiding in plant. Out of consideration for our new compatriots that have joined today, I will explain the full situation again. According to the information available, the fragment should have first appeared 11 years ago and has likely caused some kind of large-scale vision in the city. It could be a large fire, an abnormal heatwave in the entire neighborhood, or the spontaneous combustion of the collective human body. Whatever the scenario, we must investigate the matter now. The city-state authorities have detailed information about the phenomena of transcendence events over the years. Our job now is to gather these clues to deduce where our next lead lies. But beware, all inquiry must be done with caution and planning. Although the authorities have always been lax in the management of the lower city, the hounds of the Storm Church sometimes have a particularly sensitive sense of smell when it comes to us, they are already on their toes. While the leader explained the current situation to the surrounding congregation, Duncan's mind was spinning rapidly, and paying special attention to the part about 11 years ago. It's not because the sun fragment made an appearance that year, but because that's the year Nina lost her parents. From what he recalled, Nina's parents died in a fire. Is it just a coincidence? Is there such a coincidence? Duncan tried to sort out the messy and broken memories in his mind to little avail. Nevertheless, there were two crucial images he picked out from the chaotic picture. The original body owner ran out of the fire while carrying his dying niece. Behind them were the burning embers of an indistinguishable building, and the phantom-like streets were packed with crowds of frenzied civilians running for their lives. Chapter 74 Inches There's a Spy. In the end, Duncan couldn't dig up any more memories from his mind. Although Ron, the original owner of the body, had indeed worried about Nina, years of illness and abuse of alcohol and drugs had seriously damaged his cognitive ability. Therefore, when the guy breathed his last breath, many of those not rarely seen warm memories were gone, lost forever with the passing of the soul. Nevertheless, one thing's certain, there was a fire 11 years ago in the lower sector of the city. It took Nina's parents and changed the child's life forever. This may be a coincidence, but how many coincidences exist in this world? The sun fragment descended on the city-state of Plant. It caused the raging fire that burned a huge area of the city and killed many innocent people as collateral damage, thus causing a certain child to be orphaned as a result. Then a few years later, Ron, the uncle of said niece, became a degenerate due to illness and became the very scientists that likely summoned the sun fragment. When there are too many coincidences, then it's no coincidence. Perhaps a hand was twisting the knobs and pulling the strings behind these fateful events. During his long contemplation, a loud and clear voice suddenly interrupted Duncan. I have inquired about the matter from the locals in the past few days. According to their knowledge, there was no famous fire 11 years ago. However, some of them did mention a factory leak of poisonous gas from the storage tank. The gas spread across several blocks and caused a lot of people to hallucinate and go crazy. The event was also published in the weekly newspaper back then as well. Duncan looked up in surprise and saw that it was an ordinary-looking female who spoke. However, before he could seriously consider what the other party had said, the cult leader's gaze had already turned to him. Compatriot, you happen to be a local here. Do you know the situation in this regard? Duncan was startled and suddenly realized that he had become the focus of the scene. For this group of outsiders who were trying to gather intelligence, their own local who lived in the lower city of Pland was undoubtedly a good source of intelligence. Ads by PubFuture. Noticing a few sights coming from the surroundings, he thought about it for a moment. I didn't live here 11 years ago, so the specifics are not clear. However, the leakage of the factory has indeed been mentioned. While elaborating, he looked at the female believer who had just spoken. 11 years ago, there really wasn't any fire in the lower city. At least as far as I've gathered, the cultist nodded. According to what I've heard, there hasn't been a major fire in the lower sector of Pland in the past 20 years. There were small fires such as kitchen mishaps, but that is obviously not considered in the scope of our search. Duncan blinked and said nothing. He clearly remembered that Nina's parents had died in the fire 11 years ago. The memory fragments in his mind even have the image of himself rushing out of the fire with Nina. What went wrong? Is it because this body went deranged when I inherited it? Or is it because there's no fire in the lower sector of the city? Or, it's just that this cultist in front of me didn't get the right information yet. A faint doubt grew in his heart because the matter involved Nina and himself. Then as he was processing what to do, a faint voice came again from that surly child. The factory leak from 11 years ago, did it happen in the 6th block? 6th block? I believe so, the female believer nodded. It is said that the incident caused quite a big stir back then because many people were left with health conditions. As a result, many lower city residents still remember it to this day. A few believers next to him nodded and echoed what they heard, which reinforced the story since that's what they uncovered as well. The factory leaked. The leader in the center of the assembly hall suddenly broke the silence, and the deep and majestic voice resulting from the mask echoed following his words. The chemical leak could just be a cover-up by the authorities. The fact that it happened 11 years ago is too big of a coincidence. We will continue investigating this direction and see if the story points to the sun fragment. Ads by PubFuture. The worshippers at the scene immediately nodded in support. Although the sun fragment is slumbering, its awakening day is fast approaching. 4 years ago, our brethren in Pland attempted to awaken the fragment with a rite, but they were foiled by the interference of the Storm Church. But fret not. The efforts were not in vain. On the contrary, the blood spilled that day only deepened the sun's connection with our world. So now, we must pay close attention to the news and rumors on the streets. If anything unusual happens, it may also point to the sun fragment. Do you all understand? While the worshippers bowed their heads and respectfully accepted the order, Duncan, on the other hand, noticed another key point mentioned by the leader. 4 years ago. Duncan only knew the Storm Church destroyed a major stronghold of the Sun cultists, but he never knew it was related to the Sun fragment. As the ghost captain organized the new information he had just gained, a strange pungent smell suddenly penetrated his nostrils and drew the man back to reality. It smelled like burning sulfur that's been mixed with various chemicals. The next second, the surrounding cultists also smelled this pungent and unmistakable scent, causing most of them to scan around for the source. However, the masked leader standing at the hall's center instantly reacted. He pulled out the same type of sun talisman from his pocket and raised it high to unleash a globe of translucent flame. Vile filth, the flames have been deceived. The leader glanced at the burning sun talisman and voiced his anger. There is a heretic lurking among us. The hall instantly flew into an uproar, and Duncan's first reaction was that he had been exposed. Although he didn't know how he got exposed, but the sun talisman carried by the leader seemed to be able to identify the spy in their mix. Thinking of this, he sighed faintly and was ready to release the dove's undead form when he heard another sigh from the opposite side. It was the girl called Shirley who sounded regretful. I knew that dog's spell is unreliable. The disguise only lasted for 3 hours. Before the words fell, a pitch-black flame suddenly exploded around the girl's side. The flame was born out of thin air, with the shape of fire but dark as a shadow. It first spread from one of the arms to the shoulder until it covered 1/3 of Shirley's entire figure. Eventually, The eerie black flame condensed on the ground like an oozing fluid and reformed into a pitch-black demon dog physically connected to the girl through a chain. No-vel-b in .c ohm. The undead hound was over half a person tall, and its body appeared to be spliced together from countless twisted bones of other animals. Of course, there was no flesh, but it had wriggling black flames wrapped around the bones like skin. However, the most eye-catching part wasn't its main body, but the head. Those bloodied red eyes were so full of malice and hunger that it looked like it would devour its prey merely by visual contact. Dark Hound, a summoner of the Annihilation sect. The leader in the center of the assembly hall was furious when he saw this scene. What is the meaning of this? Are the worshippers of death declaring war against the sun's follower? Chapter 75 inches a beatdown. Looking at the way things are panning out, Duncan, who was ready to generously announce he was the spy, immediately retreated. Like the rest of the people here, he's also curious about what the girl has in store. No-vel-b in .c ohm. Intuition told him the girl in the black dress must have a plan, otherwise, she wouldn't be so bold to expose herself. Also, Duncan didn't miss the two names mentioned by the cult leader, Dark Hound, and Annihilation Sect. The Dark Hound was obviously referring to the giant black skeleton dog summoned by the girl. The Annihilation Sect needed no further elaboration that it's an organization too dangerous to be registered at the city hall. How many more strange dark sects are still nested in the gutters of this world? While Duncan's thoughts were spinning, the girl who summoned the Dark Hound had begun to fight by tightening her grip around the chains. She's guarded in her posture, and that sarcastic smirk indicated the girl's not fretting in the slightest. Annihilation Sect, too bad for you, but I'm not with them. Unlike you mongrels who must work for some evil god to sleep peacefully, I only do things for myself. You can't deceive us with that statement. Only the Annihilation Sect knows how to summon the deep-sea creatures. I advise you to stop resisting, heretic. This is the territory of the sun. Even the curses of your Dark Hound cannot protect you. The leader in the center of the assembly hall glared at Shirley and threatened, "Speak, what are you planning? Annihilation and sun are not aligned, but we have never been hostile. Why do you disguise your identity and blend into our sacred assembly? I just wanted to get some information out of the not-so-bright heads of you mongrels." Shirley grinned mischievously as a series of rattling sounds came from the chains connected to her body. Those chains were clearly alive in the way they squirmed with her chuckle. Also, I said it already, I am not from the Annihilation. But before Shirley could finish speaking, a series of crackling sounds had popped around the hall, setting the oil lamps into a burning frenzy. Before she knew it, small fireballs had risen from the torches and floated into the air, circling around and forming an entrapment around herself as the target. Ads by PubFuture. It's pretty obvious the experienced cult priest had used the delay he made to unleash this spell. "Surrender yourself, heretic," came the threatening voice under the golden mask. "The power of the sun god has sealed off the entire assembly ground from the outside. I know the abilities of you heretics from the Annihilation Sect. You borrow powers from the mouth of those demons you summon. I admit the Dark Hound under you is terrifying, but it's of no consequence if you can't borrow power from the deep sea." Duncan wondered if he should intervene and help the girl called Shirley. It's nice to see two dark forces bite each other, but if he did ignore this, he would be letting the information go from this windfall. Give up resistance and take refuge in the realm of the sun god. Tell me everything you know, and the merciful sun will forgive your sins. Get on your knees, young sister, you can't cast your spells here. However, in the face of the death threat, Shirley remained unfazed, like someone that's deaf to the hypnotic voice of the golden mask. Maintaining this force field must take a lot out of you, right? The sun priest snorted coldly. HMPH, the power my lord gave. Before his voice fell, the girl in the black dress jumped without indication. Raising her right arm that's embroiled in black fire, Shirley whisks herself into a spin for momentum as the Dark Hound on the ground becomes a weaponized spinning hammer of bones. The hound sent numerous cultists flying from the initial charge, but most of all, the hound sent the priest smashing into the opposite wall with a deafening crunch upon impact. It's obvious something had snapped inside the cult leader because that body instantly went limp. In fact, there weren't life signs left in the mask wearer. Duncan. Ads by PubFuture. He really didn't expect this. Talk about fast. Without waiting for the other cultists to react to their leader's death, Shirley raised her arm again with that iron chain of bone hammer and spun it into a terrifying arc. After several louder crushing snaps and knocks, the entire hall had become a splat of mangled flesh and blood. This time, the surviving cultists finally came back to their senses. Regardless of the shock in their hearts, everyone roared and rushed at the perpetrator. They threw daggers and swords through the air, and in response, Shirley unleashed a series of curse words and more attacks. Go TMD your lord. You damn bastards. The giant hound broke through the air, this time not even letting the victims fly out, and ripped them to shreds with his jaw and claws. Round and round dog went, and death and screams continued until several thumping gunshots rocked the room. The Soonists, with revolvers, finally found the gap they needed after so many of their comrades died. They were the cautious bunch and brightest since they kept their distance right from the beginning. Brass bullets pierced the air there. 2 landed on the metal chain and ricocheted off with sparks. The rest burrowed into Shirley's flesh, causing the girl to wince at the pain. Stumbling unsteadily for a while, she appeared weakened and ready to drop when the sound of iron whistled through the air again. Dog, help me block out the pain. The dark hound, slashing at the cultists on his own now, lets out a deafening roar. The next second, one of those gun-shooting cultists was directly blasted off from the shockwave and made a head-first impact to the nearest pillar, effectively becoming a mini version of Alice. Duncan silently took 2 steps back as the undead hound continued his rampage. He didn't want to interfere yet and lowered his presence, one for information, the other was that he didn't want to get blood splattered on his new outfit. If he went home today and Nina saw the mess, he would never hear the end of it. As for the one individual utilizing the meteor dog weapon, Duncan doubted the lady needed his help now. She's in good shape. In fact, the whole battle lasted no more than a minute, just enough time for Duncan to recite the multiplication table twice. Then just as the girl clutched the chain connecting her with that hound called Dog, she froze and caught a glimpse of Duncan hiding in the corner. Despite being stunned and confused by the calm appearance of this eccentric cultist, Shirley did not hesitate and flung Dog at the final target with unabashed hostility. Chapter 76 Inches Doggy's heart reading. Seeing Shirley murderously marching towards him, Duncan couldn't help but sigh and bemoan how trouble always lands on top of his head. He wasn't afraid to be fair. The guy understood his own combat experience, which was next to zero, but the tough childlike girl didn't strike him with panic at all. First of all, he has his personal undead dove who's plenty good at delaying death. The sphere of influence I projected could grow faster than any gun bullet. Therefore, if Shirley did toss the dark hound known as Dog over, he's sure I would intercept the projectile midair. Secondly, he controls the ghost fire that wields powers capable of controlling even the vanished. An undead skeleton hound could hardly compare, right? If anything, Duncan could always envelope himself in the fire and transform. Finally, and most importantly, this avatar wasn't his main body anyway. Although from a physiological point of view, this avatar seems to be alive, but in essence, it was still just a corpse driven by ghostly forces. Duncan does not need this body to remain physiologically intact to drive its activities, just like the previous avatar in the sewer that had already died by having its heart ripped out. In fact, he suspects that even if the current avatar gets chopped up into 8 pieces, he could still control the fleshly blocks and go home. The only thing to worry about was how he would explain that to Nina about her uncle's skeletal miracles after being smashed by a meteor hound. Just like that, he calmly watched the black dress girl come up to him while carrying the iron chain in her hands. Meanwhile, the strange and terrifying dark hound slowly followed behind its mistress's elusive steps. Because of the previous fierce battle, the girl's arms and cheeks were stained with blood, which completely destroyed the quiet and well-behaved temperament she gave people at the beginning. Instead, she's now projecting an eerie and dangerous vibe. You're not afraid? How weird. Shirley stopped about 3 meters in front of Duncan, frowning at the sun cultist, who didn't appear scared or nervous. Raising her chain quietly in a near-threatening manner, you giving up? Duncan thought for a moment before replying, if I say I'm not with them, will you believe me? As he spoke, he silently rubbed his fingers together in his pocket and summoned up a spark of green flame that flowed between his clothes and skin. This would act as a suit of armor in case the girl jumped at him without talking first. Ads by PubFuture. Shirley naturally didn't buy the answer and showed a WTF are you kidding me face. You think. Before she could speak, Dog the dark hound next to her cut the girl off and said in a deep, hoarse voice, I believe it. Ah, Hua. Shirley looked at her familiar dumbfoundedly. Dog, did you hit your head? This. Hold on. Dog shook his skeletal head before staggering over to one corner and started vomiting. The extraordinarily loud sound of puking slurry echoed in the blood-stained basement, and the terrifying demon from the deep sea unleashed what could only be described as a mixture of pungent black flames and acid that hissed upon contact with the concrete flooring. Duncan watched this scene unfold with an expressionless face while wondering if he had just found the shortcoming to this, Shirky's, combat style. The human could withstand the fight, but the dog couldn't take it from being flung around so much. So, the atmosphere became quite awkward and embarrassing for the next 3 minutes. Only after Dog stopped puking did Duncan speak up again. Are you okay? Dog immediately lowered his head and coiled that bony tail behind his hind legs. Thank you for your concern. I hope my embarrassing display didn't stain your eyes. Do you have any other order? If not, we'll leave first. Before Duncan could respond to what Dog said, Shirley exclaimed first, Dog, are you really okay? Did I really break your head just now? You don't usually talk to humans so politely. Duncan had begun to catch on to the truth. Deepening his gaze at the murderous-looking dark hound, he mused with amusement on what to do next. Do you know why I am? Do you know me? I don't know, Dog repeated without daring to make eye contact. I really don't know, but you're definitely a great being, there's no doubt about that. Duncan frowned and pressed, I don't look like a human in your eyes, do I? Dog hesitation flared up again before cautiously answering, you, like, not. Duncan withdrew his gaze and turned to Shirley this time. The girl in the black dress was making a disbelieving face. Whatever hostility she had for Duncan had dissipated, replaced by a thick layer of shock and wariness. Ads by PubFuture. This girl's personality appeared reckless but obviously not stupid. After her, pet dog continuously shows such abnormal behavior, even the most reckless personality would calm down at this time and realize something was terribly wrong. While quietly tightening the chains between her and the dark hound, she quietly took half a step back and stared at Duncan for any signs of sudden movement. You just said you are not with them, November LBJNN. Yes, Duncan spread his hands, you may not believe me, but also mixed into inquire about intelligence. I believe it, Shirley said crisply. This time it was Duncan's turn to be a little taken aback. He suddenly found the impression he had of this girl to be changing. At first, her image was that of a well-behaved child with a violent and bloodied side. Now, he's also mistaken about Shirley's reckless tendency. What kind of family does this girl have to produce such a personality? With strange questions running through his heart, Duncan found himself a little overwhelmed by the contradictions. Eventually, he put it behind him and pressed forward. Why did you keep looking at me during the rally? It's Dog who kept paying attention to you, Shirley replied reluctantly but still honestly cooperated. I followed his lead and grew curious. Dog, you mean your dark hound? Duncan frowned and glanced at the pitch-black bony hound. I just heard that priest mention the Annihilation sect. Is it the church you worship? Are you part of the Annihilation sect? I'm not with them. Shirley immediately rebukes the notion with strong emotions. It's their business to worship the deep sea. Me and Dog met under certain circumstances. Duncan's gaze now fell on the chain between the girl's arm and the dark hound. According to the information obtained, worshipping the deep sea allows a follower to summon up a demonic creature from the nether. This was the main reason that Sun Priest assumed Shirley came from the Annihilation sect. Although the consequence of that judgment was the unorthodox attack of a meteor dog hammer, this information should be acceptable and correct. The only wrong thing about all this would be this problematic and eccentric girl in front of him. She seems to be very resistant to being associated with cultists, even though she owns a dark hound from the deep sea. It's okay if you're not. Duncan shook his head and waved to drop the question. Then why are you here, and what are you investigating? Shirley pursed her lips, seemingly not wanting to answer the question. However, the nervous signals constantly released by the hound beside herself made the child understand she must. Otherwise, the consequences of lying or staying mute in front of this ordinary-looking middle-aged man would be dire. At the moment when she was about to speak, a loud popping sound suddenly exploded in the basement, and a fiery fireball flew over from the side. Chapter 77 Inches Thoughts on the Fire. A pop exploded in the basement, followed by a blazing fireball suddenly flying over from the side. The sneak attack would have been fatal if not for Duncan being aware of this ahead of time. He had already raised his hand without thinking. A little burning sensation came from the fingertips. Then, in the next second, the ghost fire that spewed out flew into the fireball with a recoiling and deflagrating momentum. Once infected, the attack was no longer threatening but had transformed into a ball of pulsating green. This opening didn't escape a certain dark hound there. Immediately without hesitation, Dog jumped backward and ripped open a grisly crack of darkness and fog in the rear. Using this escape tunnel, he directly jumped in and dragged Shirley in using the black chain's momentum. Meanwhile, the girl herself hadn't forgotten to spit out the bullets she ate from the fighting. And just like that, the child and her dog had disappeared from the room and into the weird rift were now closed. Duncan was naturally taken by surprise at how quickly the pair made their escape. It's definitely practiced and well performed. He had to give them that. I still have a lot of questions that I haven't asked yet. And this is all because of a sneak attack from a cultist. Duncan's mood fell into a subtle gloom as he shifted his gaze in the assailant's direction. The masked priest was leaning crookedly against the corner pillar, barely breathing with a raised arm in the air. Apparently, that was the last draw of power from that vessel. I better get into the habit of finishing off my foes. It won't do if stuff like this happens during my fights. Duncan gloomily approached the priest, who didn't die properly with the green fireball silently floating above his palm. With every step he took, the torches closest to him would flare up into a pyre of ghostly green, the sign that they'd been overtaken by the power emanating from the ghost captain. For this, a glint of fear finally struck the priest's eyes. Like everything else in the basement hall, his own connection to that black sun had begun to wane. N-O-B in .c ohm. Ads by PubFuture. You are no ordinary heretic. What the hell are you? The masked priest asks with shock and fear. Following the last usurpation of the torches, the ghost captain stopped only a foot away from the survivor and stared down. I didn't get to finish when you interrupted me. That is very rude of you. Did your mother not teach you manners? As he spoke, the ghost captain finally noticed the state of the sun priest and how wrong he was to blame Shirley for not doing a proper job. Half of the guy's chest had caved in, with various rib cages smashed and likely pierced a lung or two. Without question, if left untreated, the individual would die in no time and doesn't need an extra stab to kill. Why the priest didn't die yet was likely the effect of whatever mystique entity hiding behind him. But even so, that power holding the person above the death line had reached its limit. Duncan could clearly see the life force rapidly leaving the priest's body as they spoke. It seems that the blessings of the sun god are not very reliable. Duncan shook his head and sighed with a lamenting face. Your lord has left you. The ghost captain may have sighed casually like he was merely stating the facts. Still, the careless remark had the unintended effect of stimulating the dying priest into a frenzied rage. I offer myself to the Lord. May the holy cloth purify the heresy before you. The priest shouted and raised a filthy blood-stained fabric he pulled from the pocket. This was the guy's last-ditch effort to drag Duncan down with him, a double suicide of only the most insane and corrupt. Duncan, however, only watched this final crazed act with indifference. Although the priest did startle him with that sudden gesture, but after getting a closer look at the item, his whole body instantly relaxed. Why? Because the strange cloth strip that got raised high was none other than the very thing they used to verify Duncan's identity after coming inside. Whatever sacred power the cloth had belonged to the ghost captain now. Ads by PubFuture. Just as predicted, the holy relic remained quiet and unresponsive, causing the cult priest's maddening face to slowly crumble. After a few more seconds of dazedness in those eyes, the dying man abruptly flew into an incessant coughing fit of blood. I offer this body to the Lord. Let me guess, this is what you wanted to do, right? Duncan couldn't stand this sight anymore and pointed at the blood-stained fabric. In the next second, a cluster of dark green flames exploded and ignited the holy relic and spread across the crazed man's body. No, it shouldn't be like this. The Lord will not turn his back on me. The Lord will punish you heretic, who. In the raging fire, the voice of the cult priest gradually died down until it's completely mute. Whatever supernatural power that supported the guy's life was now extinguished, as well as the body that burned to ash in the raging green pyre. This brought another unexpected frown to Duncan. Honestly, this was not the first time the ghost captain had seen a corpse. The sacrifices he found in the underground cave before had already hardened his nerves. What he didn't like about this was that his flames also burned the cultist to ash. He only wanted to destroy the blood-stained cloth out of prudence of caution, so he made sure to not overdo it. The surviving clothes and golden mask were evident he didn't misjudge his own strength. Why did this cultist get burned by my ghost fire too when I didn't order it to? Duncan crouched down and examined the residue in confusion. According to what he could see, the grayish pile of soot looked no different from the usual stuff. At least not distinct enough where he could see a difference. Slowly, a bold idea popped into the ghost captain's mind. Can it be? Mortals blessed by a specific god will also be considered a supernatural object. Chapter 78 Inches Changing Shifts and Reporting. Duncan's pondering was naturally fruitless because he didn't know where to find a second breathing soonest to test his deductions. This kind of thing depends on fate and plenty of luck. Pulling himself up, Duncan scanned the room and paced in a circle, causing the green torches to sway at his every step. Believers who believe in their gods and receive a blessing may be seen by the ghost fire as a supernatural object. Then, what about ordinary people? Does it have other effects than lighting up a room when lit on a mortal? If not, how much blessing must a god give the mortal before they are spiritually changed? Will it also work on the good god disciples? Duncan calmly glanced at the ghost lights in the room and formed a faint and eerie smile. But they are still people. Stopping here before his theories got out of hand, Duncan didn't want to cross a line of no return in his worldview. This flame was a powerful force that could warp even the most dangerous of entities in this world. If he didn't keep reminding himself of this fact, he might actually lose awareness that he too was human and shouldn't think any less of his fellow man. Otherwise, what difference would he have from those monsters that treat others as mere sacrifices? That's a bridge of depravity he doesn't want to cross. Exhaling softly to get his mind back in order, Duncan waved his hand to dismiss the green fireball that was floating in the air. Afterward, the environment in the basement quickly returned to normal as well, giving the guy a proper picture of the carnage that just took place in the hall. More importantly, it also gave him room to think of what to do next. Ads by PubFuture. The eccentric girl named Shirley was gone after using some special means of escape, and now he doesn't know where to look. A regrettable outcome since he still had a lot of questions he wanted to ask. But no matter, instincts told Duncan they would eventually meet again. He was in search of information, and Shirley was also in search of information. Since their goals aligned, there's no way they wouldn't bump into each other. Besides, that dark hound called Dog didn't seem to be the type of character to stay quiet. As for the mess here, Duncan had no interest in helping with the cleanup duty. He picked up the golden mask and casually cleaned the soot off with his sleeve. This would make a fine trophy aboard the Vanished for further investigation. But it's a little bit too big to carry around. Duncan muttered, then weighed his options. In any case, an expert would probably recognize the item immediately. It may even draw the Storm Church's attention knowing they have some weird detection means. I better not bring this back to the antique shop then. Even if I hide it, Nina might find it during her cleaning. By then, I won't be able to explain the mosque's origin. Best to send it to the Vanished right away. With that thought in mind, Duncan shifted his gaze over to I, who had been resting on his shoulder, and cocked his head to signal her to move it. Reading his thought, the dove promptly chirped a counteroffer. Big hammer is 80, small hammer is 40. That irked Duncan a bit since he never thought about bargaining with his own pet, just work the overtime. When we get back, I'll figure out a way to make you some French fries aboard the Vanished. I want to see if you can bring the mask back on your own without my company. The dove immediately flapped her wings and drew a circle in the air like some overjoyed pixie. I wanted to refuse, but the offer you gave is too tempting. Then before the sentence was done, I had already transformed into her undead form and carried off the mask into the void. Duncan was still connected with the bird, of course. Right now, I's energy signature had appeared inside the captain's bedroom aboard the Vanished. Ads by PubFuture. Damn, the delay is less than a second. She's fast. Teleportation. Duncan just sighed in his heart at how capable the bird was. Then, before the ghost captain could think more, the bony undead bird had returned following a whisk of distorting air. Teleportation success. The bird flapped her wings and chirped triumphantly. In the following minutes, Duncan confirmed no blood had caught onto his clothes or the crime scene. He had never touched anything since entering for fear of leaving a fingerprint, so the extra precaution wasn't necessary. Then, carefully prying open the iron door with his clothes as a cushion, he returned to the outside following the stairs. By this hour, the sun, bound by the double rune ring, had gradually begun to set on the horizon, soon to be replaced by the giant crack in the night sky. This signaled Duncan to call it for the day. Nina would return home soon, and it wouldn't be good to snoop around at night and act all suspicious. No-bel-b, in .c ohm. Besides, the kids, Uncle Duncan, had just gotten better, so he needed to act the role of a good uncle, did he not? Quickly leaving the abandoned factory behind and taking the same route, the man soon found himself walking through sewage-smelling alleys until he heard the faint sound of traffic. He could still catch the last bus down to the lower sector if he hurried. But Duncan stopped. At the intersection not far ahead, he saw 4 men in uniform standing there. The first 2 wore dark blue police uniforms with epaulettes on their shoulders. In contrast, the last other 2 wore slightly ecclesiastical black outfits in the shape of trench coats. However, the latter had another conspicuous thing hanging around their waists, a lantern decorated with runes, apparently used for night patrols. This left Duncan stunned for a moment until he understood they were changing shifts for the night and not out to get him. The police maintain order during the day, and the guardians protect the peace at night. This was a unique scenery to this world during the interchanging of day and night. Knowing he hadn't been caught, Duncan casually marched over like a regular person. The less weird you behave, the less likely you would be suspected. Eventually, a church guardian carrying out the handover finally noticed the figure coming toward them. Then, raising a hand out in a stopping motion, "Citizen. It's getting dark. Go home as soon as possible. It's not safe outside." "Gentlemen, I'm here to make a report," Duncan said sincerely as he walked over, quickening his pace during the last bit. "I heard a lot of movement in the abandoned factory over there. There were a lot of sneaky guys coming in and out of there earlier." Speaking of this, he paused and added, "I read in the newspaper before, saying that everyone should actively report suspicious gatherings and abnormal noises around them." Chapter 79 Inches Flickering Light. Deep within a vulgar old alley far from the abandoned factory, an inconspicuous rundown house suddenly lit up after the oil lamps came to life. Under the flickering lights, one could see the arrangement of the household, simple and old furnishings, a moldy ceiling, and faded and peeling wallpapers. "The world creation is out," the girl named Shirley exhaled softly after checking her companion's exhausted appearance. "Good thing we made it back home before nightfall, otherwise, we may have to die in some smelly old gutter like a dead dog." The skeleton hound immediately raised his head and objected, "Just say it, don't bring dogs into the conversation." "Oh, you can still talk. I thought half your life went out the window when you jumped into the shadow rift." Shirley narrowed her eyes at her friend and commented sarcastically, "You going to explain yet? Why did we suddenly run away and use the most dangerous shadow diving method at that? Didn't you say countless demons of the deep sea would love to chew you out? No matter how many demons there are in the deep sea, I can still avoid and dodge them." But just now, Dog finally sounded like he's regained some energy and faced Shirley's accusing gaze. "You should be glad I reacted so quickly when that guy turned his attention away from us. Otherwise, we might not even have that chance to flee." Shirley frowned and slowly kneeled down to eye level with her companion. "So what's going on? Why are you so scared like this? That guy named Duncan, did you meet him before? Is he some big shot from the Annihilation sect? Or is there some demon standing behind him?" The dark hound, who seemed to recall some extremely terrifying picture, clattered its bones and muttered, "I haven't seen him before, and I don't know him." Shirley cocked an eyebrow in confusion. "Why are you so afraid if you never met him before?" "Even if I haven't met him before, as a deep-sea demon, I can see a shadow more terrifying than death behind the guy." The dark hound suddenly got all serious as those hollow red eyes glowed with force. "Behind the shell of that human is a vortex of light and shadow. Just staring at it is enough to make me lose my sanity. How can I not be afraid of something like that? Speaking of this, Dog paused as if to organize the language best needed to describe his feelings to Shirley. After a good minute of silence, when it spoke, I could hear 1,000 voices overlapping one another. It was roaring at me, a mishmash of death and life. You don't get it, Shirley. The only time I ever saw anything like that was when I got an audience with the Deep Sea Lord. But the Lord doesn't move, and this person did. Ads by PubFuture. Shirley felt her hair rising now due to the emotions transferred through her connection with Dog. Muttering as a shudder ran down her back. Why didn't I feel anything back there then? I thought he was quite nice. That's why I sometimes envy you humans with that inefficient and dull perception. The barrier of ignorance is truly a treasure this world gave your kind. Even in the face of distortionary madness, you humans can still smile and die happy. The dark hound suddenly deflated and lay back down again after exclaiming his own grievance, just stay blind. This way, the world will keep looking nicer. Poor puppy, I am not so lucky. Every couple of days, there would be something so scary that a dog will drop dead at a glance, N-O-B-L-B, in .c ohm. How can the world have such a TMD cowardly demon like you? Shirley couldn't resist shooting a disappointed look at her friend before getting an idea. But when you say it like that, I think we shouldn't have run back there. If the guy is really as powerful as you claim, wouldn't it be better to cling to his legs? He spoke so nicely to us and clearly had more questions for us to answer. Maybe he could have helped us deal with the scientists as well. I'm quite good at acting cute, you know. Who knows? However, before the girl could finish speaking, the loud rattling of the chains startled her. Next, the loud exclaiming anger of the dark hound blasted the ears. Put away your crazy idea immediately. Your level of madness is almost enough to open the subspace channel. Then Dog paused before continuing with a warning. Listen, never make deals with something that would bear the skin of a human. Those types are the most cunning and sinister of them all. They may have a peaceful conversation with you, but that's only the appetizer before the feast. Don't judge everything by the surface, okay? If you had told him everything, do you think he would have allowed us to leave? It seemed that the harsh tone from Dog had finally taken effect on Shirley. Sounding like a child that's made a mistake before the adult, the girl mumbled in a moping manner, I get it. Why do you sound like an old mother now? Dog huffs and retorts, that's obvious. I raised you. Shirley snorted, then looked out the window where the sun's light had disappeared, replaced by the firm darkness of the night. Without another word, she inched closer to the windowsill and dragged Dog over by the belly. What are you doing? Can't you at least let a dog rest for a bit? I'm exhausted from all the fighting today. Dog protests and bemoans. The one who mainly fought was me, okay. Shirley glanced out at the murky glass without much emotions. I'm checking the situation outside, the street lights had just come on. This is the slums after all, you can't expect the authorities to ensure every street is maintained properly. It's good enough that they actually came on after dark to repel the evil spirits. Dog muttered, then glanced at the oil lamp on the dining table. Let's turn off the lights here. Oil is expensive. Shirley pursed her lips. I'll snuff it when I go to bed, otherwise it's too dark in the house. Ads by PubFuture. Dog grumbled but didn't comment. In the city-state, the city managers and architects strictly planned the location of each street light to ensure coverage on every dwelling. This was the most basic device for repelling evil, and the most effective. But even the most prosperous cities have forgotten corners. For example, the slums where Shirley and Dog lived. There are far fewer gas street lights in the slums, which are older and more dilapidated than even the lower sectors. Sure, it's good enough to ensure safety during the day, but at night, such an arrangement was obviously not reassuring enough. So, the occupants here would resort to oil lamps and grease candles as precautionary measures. At the very least, until the street lamps came on if they were late. Of course, there was another important reason why many poor households used oil lamps and candles. They could not afford the relatively high cost of electricity conversion. Electric lights are bright, clean, and safe, and in a safe and secure urban area, it has long been the first choice for lighting every home. But in this dilapidated house of the slums, the only sense of security for Shirley and Dog remains to be that swaying flicker of light from the old oil lamp. Do you still want to remain active for the next while? Dog's hoarse and rattling voice came again through the dim lighting. Shirley. Dog. You mean making trouble for those sun mongrels, right? Shirley. Not trouble, getting intel. Dog. It's not much different. From how they sounded, they aren't very clear on what happened 11 years ago either. They are asking the locals about it. Surely. This is because the group today happened to be from Lunsa. There may be a harvest next time. Dog. Okay, if that's what you want. Surely. Dog, you focus on knitting me a better camouflage first. Don't leave me exposed halfway through like today. Dog. I just hope we don't run into that terrible guy today. I suspect the reason why our presence got exposed early was due to such a strong interference on the scene. Surely. Okay, if that's what you want to think. Chapter 80 Inches Home Visit. Before the last rays of light dissipated, Duncan saw the familiar facade of the antique shop again. The gas street lamps on both sides of the road had long been lit, and the slightly yellowed lights illuminated the signs and gray walls in front of the door. By the glow from the windows inside, it's clear that Nina was already inside and waiting. Strictly speaking, from Duncan's point of view, he and Nina have just met. Still, for some reason, he got this inexplicable warm feeling in his heart knowing someone was waiting for him at home. But also, a hint of regret. Is this apologetic emotion because I haven't returned on time after going out? Duncan stepped forward and pushed open the door of the antique shop. With the crisp ringing of the bell, he immediately picked up on the rushing footsteps of someone running down the stairs. No bell b in c ohm. Uncle Duncan. Nina stopped at the corner of the stairs like a gush of wind, her eyes full of surprise and joy. I thought you were again today. I went around the city and lost track of time until it was already getting dark. Duncan shook his head. I'm sorry, but I was actually going to pick you up from school at the crossroad, but then I had an accident. You went to the crossroad? Nina widened her eyes in surprise and bewilderment. Then eyeing her uncle up and down to confirm the man's not drunk or under the effects of drugs. Pick me up, from school. Her uncle Duncan showed a strange and familiar side again, which left Nina unsure of how to react. I'm just a little curious about your current situation at school, Duncan said casually. Anyways, you don't have to worry about me going out to drink or hang with friends in the future. If I come back late, it's because I have business to attend to, understand? Nina dumbly watched her uncle Duncan enter the house and close the door behind himself. Even afterward, all the girl could do was nod unconsciously without uttering a single word. It's getting late, Duncan said to Nina, who was standing at the top of the stairs. Have you eaten? Not yet, probably because she was still not adjusted to her uncle's changes yet. Nina sounded hesitant and unsure. When I came back, I saw that you weren't home, so I didn't know if you would come back tonight. That's why I haven't cooked yet. But I bought some bread, I was going to. Bread alone isn't nutritious enough. Let's go, there's some good stuff in the kitchen. Duncan was about to climb the stairs when he cocked a smirk. I'll cook today. Ads by PubFuture. Uncle is going to cook. Nina seemed to have heard something straight out of a novel, that's how shocking the idea was. Then as the two crossed paths on the stairs, the young lady suddenly noticed eye on Duncan's shoulder. Uncle, this dove has been with you. Yes, it's pretty clingy, Duncan said casually. I named it I. What a strange name for a dove. Nina scratched her hair as she followed up to the second floor. Eventually, curiosity got the better of her as the man closed in on the kitchen. Did you buy anything? Actually, it's just a salted fish. Duncan found the salted fish he put in the kitchen cupboard and showed it to Nina. His face couldn't be prouder when doing so. Don't assume it's bad based on its looks. The taste is superb inside a soup. Fish. Nina's eyes widened in surprise. What day is it? Fish is so expensive, isn't it normally? But as the girl exclaimed, her eyes suddenly caught sight of the fish's appearance. It's an ugly thing, which left the young lady bewildered and blinking. What kind of fish is this? How have I not seen it before? Duncan knew that Nina would react this way. Of course, it's not that the city-state's inhabitants haven't seen fish before. Although the boundless sea was dangerous and full of shadowy creatures lurking under its depths, that doesn't mean they couldn't fish in the relatively safe shallows near the islands. On the contrary, it's a valuable resource that's highly prized among its citizens. Under this premise, the profession of fisherman will of course also exist. However, the world's oceans are not like the Earth, and even if there are safe waters, they are only safe compared with the deeper depths. So, Even if it's offshore fishing in this world, it is still a dangerous and thrilling job requiring the fisherman's greatest wits. In this case, Nina hadn't eaten fish in years. Even before her uncle fell ill, a commoner like her had little chance of seeing fish served to the table. Don't fret about its species. Just wait and enjoy the catch. Duncan didn't want to dwell on the matter because he too didn't know what kind of fish this was. Instead, it's better to focus that energy on preparing tonight's dinner. This strange fish was not small. Even when dried, the sizable body could be sectioned off for several meals afterward. For example, the head could be turned into soup, with the rest of the body hanging on the cupboard for further air drying. This would create a more flavorful profile with time. Uncle really started cooking. Ads by PubFuture. Watching the familiar figure getting busy in the kitchen, Nina felt like she was in a dream. The young lady didn't really care what happened to the strange fish her uncle took out, nor did she care about tonight's dinner. Compared with these trivial things, the changes that happened to her uncle are the strangest and most worthy of her attention. The sound of knives clashing against cutting boards was heard, the gas stove was hissing, and the broth in the pot was bubbling. Nina hadn't heard these noises in how many years? Then a hint of hesitation appeared on her face after recalling something. After several minutes of being troubled inside, "Uncle, tomorrow. Mr. Morris is coming for a home visit." "Home visit?" Duncan looked stunned for a second. "Mr. Morris, as in your history teacher?" Nina nodded. "Yes. The teachers at that school even make home visits." Duncan threw the processed fish into the pot and glanced back at Nina in surprise while he put the knife away. "I thought this was the specialty of those schools in the upper sector only." "The school, indeed, doesn't have that requirement," Nina said carefully while paying attention to Duncan's attitude, "but Mr. Morris is special. He pay extra attention to his students." Duncan didn't speak for a while because this exceeded his expectations. He had considered dealing with the church, the police, and even the city-state navy and military if the worst occurred. Still, he never envisaged in his plan that an old man teaching history would visit him from the public schools. Why is reality always so unexpected? "Uncle." Nina grew a little worried after seeing Duncan didn't respond. "Are you unwilling?" "Then I can tell Mr. Morris. In fact, I told him today. I told him your health is not very good, so I can't accept a home visit this time." He didn't say anything at that time. Duncan watched Nina's somewhat nervous reaction and found a flood of emotions hidden behind that behavior. From the looks of things, this is not the first time Mr. Morris requested a home visit. How many times has Nina refused using the same excuse? "He's teaching history, right?" Duncan suddenly asked again. Although she didn't know why her uncle asked this question again, Nina nodded. "Yes. This is a good opportunity. I happen to want to meet a professional historian." Duncan laughed. "When is he coming over tomorrow?"